Did you know that Berlin's history as a city dates back to 1237 and that it was an important trading center long before that? And much of this medieval history was erased by Allied bombs and artillery during World War II. But a few traces of Berlin's early years survive, and you can find them if you know where to look. And that's what we're going to do in this video. I'm going to bring you to some of the remnants of medieval and Renaissance Berlin that still exist today. I've set this up as a walking tour so that you can replicate it when you visit the city, or you could hire me to take you around. All right, let's go back in time. And our first stop is just a short walk from Alexanderplatz. When people think of the Berlin Wall, of course, it's this wall that comes to mind. However, the Berlin Wall that we all think of today had several predecessors, including one that goes back to the city's founding. But this wall was designed to keep people out, not in. The city's original wall, erected sometime in the early 13th century, was roughly 2.5 kilometers in length and circled what was then the twin cities of Berlin and Cologne. And I'm standing approximately here. You can still make out the border of the early settlements on today's Berlin map. The area included Nikolaiviertel and most of Alexanderplatz on the east side of the river, and today's Museum Island and Fisher's Island on the west side. At its peak, the wall reached about 8 meters or 25 feet in height, and just under a meter thick, consisting of brick and stone. The Stadtmauer, as it was called, lost its function as the city gradually expanded, and many of its bricks were repurposed, and even parts of the wall were incorporated into homes or property lines. This includes one's use as a patio wall for Berlin's oldest restaurant, Zu letzten Instanz. Although not from the medieval period, this restaurant dates back to the 15th century, so make a plan for lunch or dinner at this surprisingly well-reviewed tourist magnet. There are 3 surviving sections here, which collectively are an official memorial today, measuring roughly 150 meters in length. Ironically, while much of what still existed of medieval Berlin was obliterated by the war, it was during the cleanup of the debris that these parts of the medieval wall were rediscovered. And it's a shame that many people miss this important landmark, especially since it's such a short walk away from Alexanderplatz. I love coming down here to what's called the Klosterviertel because it's relatively peaceful in the middle of all this noise. And there are a few other important landmarks to see nearby. And speaking of that, let's go see another relic of medieval Berlin. These are the ruins of the Franziskaner Klosterkirche, or the Franciscan Cloister Church. It dates back to roughly 1250 and perhaps a bit earlier. The Franciscans are a Roman Catholic order established by St. Francis of Assisi in 1209. The Franciscans in Berlin were dissolved during the Reformation, and the church grounds saw various uses from that point forward, including Berlin's first grammar school, where German giant Otto von Bismarck attended. The church and monastic buildings would be used for various other functions, including housing printing presses and laboratories. They were all badly damaged due to the bombing raids on Berlin during World War II. And the monastic buildings that once surrounded the church have disappeared. Today, the ruins and its grounds are an open-air historic site, often used for exhibitions and cultural events. Unfortunately, its interior spaces are likely to be off-limits when you come to visit. On the surrounding grounds, you'll find several sculptures, including this abstract, even minimalist reproduction of the Pietà, or this one of Christ holding his crown of thorns, or from this angle, holding the top of the Ferns Ehrturm. The grounds make for a very peaceful wander, and you are right across the street from the Amtsgericht, or city courthouse. The courthouse has a magnificent interior that you could visit free of charge. It just takes a few minutes, but be prepared to go through security. And on the other side of the Franciscan monastery is the Klosterviertel U-Bahn station. Duck inside for a quick visit. The station is most notable for its blue and yellow glazed tiles featuring stylized palm trees. It's a protected landmark and doubles as a museum on early omnibus transportation in Berlin. Now from here we are going to head closer to the center of old medieval Berlin. But before we do that, on the other side of the medieval wall was a ditch, a double moat system, and a road. All 3 surrounded most of the settlements of Alt-Berlin and Cologne. And here today, at the Stadtmauer Memorial, we have buildings taking up part of this space. But in the distance, you could see the elevated train line. This trackway is part of the Stadtbahn line, the elevated railway that runs east and west through the city center. It was the city's first public rail line and was built in the late 18th century. The viaduct was built partly along the route of this moat, ditch, and road system. If and when you ride the S-Bahn or any of the regional trains along the Stadtbahn line between Hackerschmark and Janowitzbrücke, you are effectively riding along the old route of the wall. Okay, now on to our next location. We are now walking closer to the very heart of medieval Berlin. And here is one of Berlin's oldest streets, Judenstrasse. The street lends its name from the Großen Judenhof, or in English, the Great Jewish Courtyard, which was located in the courtyard behind these two buildings. As early as the city's foundation, Jews have been a part of Berlin. Today, the courtyard is part of a larger excavation site and one of the biggest redevelopment projects in Berlin, Molkenmarkt. Molkenmarkt means way market and probably was where milk products were traded in the city's early years. What is clear was that this was the city's main public market as way back as the city's founding. The area was flattened during the war and a more direct road was paved over the center of the area. Excavations for a new major redevelopment project have unearthed many building foundations dating back to the city's medieval period, including homes, latrines, and perhaps most interesting, a road. The road was made of thick oak logs, carbon dated to the 13th century. And archaeologists believe it was designed to overcome the marshy and often muddy grounds near the river. And many of the artifacts being uncovered should make their way to Berlin museums in the near future, and archaeologists plan to finish up their work pretty soon. I'll link to some resources for you to learn more about these very interesting digs. Now on to our next stop. We are entering the Nikolaiviertel, named after the Nikolaikirche, or St. Nicholas Church, which is the center of the neighborhood. The area is amongst the oldest in the city, but mostly leveled during the Second World War. And today a rather worthy GDR-era reconstruction based on late 19th century photographs is what you'll find, which does include a few medieval buildings. I previously filmed a video walking tour of the area, and I will link to it in the description below. But the main draw is the church. Nikolaikirche is a double-spired church that serves as a museum of the church and a concert venue. Its look today is a bit different than its early years, though the first few layers of stone are from the 1200s, and its Romanesque and early Gothic features are all original to the medieval period. It was completely gutted due to firebombs, and only the stone shell of the church stood at the end of the war. Restorations on the church would only commence in preparation for the city's 750th birthday celebration in the 1980s. There's a small fee to enter the church. Inside, you will find a large and colorful central nave with a giant wood carving of the crucifixion hanging from the ceiling. There is also an array of sculptural and gilded pieces, as well as a large and beautiful organ. Many of the liturgical items are from post-Reformation, but what I find most interesting is the model of the original settlement, which I believe is on loan from another museum. It depicts the street and building layout of the twin cities at the time of the founding. And here is the Nikolaikirche. And staying on the theme of churches, Berlin has a third medieval church, which is the subject of our next stop. Here we have the magnificent Marienkirche, or St. Mary's Church. It is one of Berlin's original 6 medieval churches, and it's the oldest active congregation in the city. The area around the church was once known as the Marienviertel, or St. Mary's District. And in this model depicting 1880, you can see Marienkirche and the Rotes Rathaus and the surrounding buildings leading up to the city palace. Amazingly, the church survived the war, with structural damage but mostly intact. Sadly, almost all of the surrounding area was leveled during the war. However, in the pavement surrounding the church, you will find the outlines of some of these adjacent buildings. While the buildings that were destroyed were likely more modern upgrades, the layouts originate from the medieval period. Marienkirche is a Gothic church with a splendid interior space with a spacious central nave and a very large gold-decorated organ just above the entrance. However, the main draw here for the church is its 22-meter-long fresco, which is located at the base of the church's tower. It's titled Totentanz, the Dance of the Dead, and it is dated from the 15th century plague that struck Berlin. The fresco shows death as a skeleton, leading people of all social ranks, kings, clergy, merchants, peasants, all in a grim procession. The church is free to enter and is very much worth a stop by when you're in the area. And just outside the front of the church, you will find this statue of Martin Luther, the great Reformationist. And now on to our last stop of this tour, which is just around the corner. This is the Heiliggeistkapelle, or the Holy Ghost Chapel. It dates back to roughly 1300, and was once attached to the Spital or hospital of the same name. It was located just inside the northernmost section of the medieval city wall at the Spandauer Gate. The chapel building has been used for many different functions over the years. Amazingly, it survived World War II relatively unscathed. The medieval brick structure and field stones of the chapel are largely original. Its vaulted ceiling was added in the 1500s. Today it belongs to Humboldt University, which uses it primarily as a venue for lectures, events, and ceremonies. It's usually not open to the public, so you'll probably have to admire it from the outside. Now, you may have noticed that this tour has remained on the eastern side of the River Spree, in Alt-Berlin. But there was also Old Köln, the other side of medieval Berlin, which was located on the western side of the Spree. Unfortunately, other than vague street layouts, nothing of note from the medieval period is accessible here. There were recent excavations of St. Peter's Church, its accompanying graveyards, a Latin school, and the old city hall some years back. The archaeologists discovered the remains of almost 4,000 people, dating back to as far as the mid-1100s. This location is called Petriplatz, or Petersplatz, Peter Square, and part of the redevelopment will contain exhibit spaces for artifacts uncovered during the excavation. Now continue to discover Berlin by taking this video walking tour of the Nikolaiviertel, or check out my playlist on visitor tips to Berlin right here. If you like this video, please share this with somebody else you think might like it, and give this video a thumbs up and consider subscribing to my channel. I post regular videos of Berlin, and I'll see you in the next video. Cheers!